Today is July 30th, 2013. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University, and we're working on a project with Oklahoma's 100 Year of Life, people who have lived up to be 100 or more. And today we're in Tulsa with Opal Bennefield Clark. That's what she uses most of the time for her business, but she's also married. Her last name now is Moss. So thank you for having us today. Let's start with learning a little bit about you. Can you tell us when and where you were born?
I was born in a town that no longer exists. However, when I went to try to find it after they had moved the town to put the Mulgay byway across where it was, they moved the town and you can hardly find it. And one man, a nice man that did a piece on me, said that he couldn't find the town of Bennefield, but it was there. And I found where they had changed the graveyard, and I couldn't find my father's grave, but I found a lot of other Bennefields and my grandfather and grandmother's grave, but I couldn't find my father's that I had found in the old graveyard, but it's probably there. That's why one man who was interviewing me said I was without a town.
And when were you born?
I was born in 1912. Why would I? On May the 20th, 1912.
Okay. So 101.
And I am now 101.
How did you celebrate your 100th birthday?
The town gave me a party. Town of Sand Springs gave me a party along with the party for the town, because I was 1 year older than the town. 1 day older than the town. My birthday was May the 20th, and the town was incorporated on May the 22nd. So that made the day in between made me 1 day older than the town, and they had a cake for me.
Okay. A lot of people then.
A lot of people there. The town really turned out, and I was so overwhelmed that I couldn't even say anything but thank you to them when they gave me a lot of awards, from even something from the governor. I don't understand a lot of the things that I received, but Zachary inducted me into the Centurion Club. I guess it's a club, and others were giving me some sort of awards, and then I was so overwhelmed, and sadly I couldn't think of anything to say. I wish I had introduced my family, because my whole family, in-laws, and all came clear from California to see me receive that honor. And I'm sad that I didn't think to thank everybody for all that they had done, and that they have been so good to me. Everybody's been so good to me, and I wanted to thank them. And it's just like I didn't thank Daddy Page, and I wrote this book about Fool's Enterprise, or the life of Charles Page, as a thank you to him. And I felt like that he didn't put his name on anything, because he had a superstitious streak in him that told him if he put his name on the things and everything, that the big fellow wouldn't like it and his luck would change. He had just gotten lucky in the oil business, and he said his luck might change if he, and he said, I've got too many little mouths to feed for me to take any chances with the Lord getting angry at me for taking credit for this town. And he said, I'm just a steward of his finances, and that everything belongs to him. And he believed that when the Bible says, don't let your right hand know what your left hand gives, he believes that's what it means. Don't put your name on things that belong to God. So he called the town Sand Springs because the Indians had called the big spring that was so important to both Tulsa and Sand Springs, because he piped the water so Tulsa could have spring water, and he piped it to Tulsa for them too, and he didn't want any, and he didn't give it the town a name for himself. He just called it Sand Springs on account of the big spring.
Well, how did you come to be in Sand Springs?
Well, my mother lived, when my father died, my mother had a very hard time trying to make a living for, for 4 children that she had. She had lost 2 children that were died in infancy, and she had 4 of us, and she had a very hard time making a living, and I don't know what in the world she did, that she moved in a little bit with her mother, whose husband had died, and moved out because I don't know enough of, because I was too young to know all about how she did it. But she became ill, and she heard the neighbors talking about giving us away, like Anne of Green Gables was given away, and she didn't want us to become little unpaid servants to somebody, and mainly didn't want the family broken up. And so she had heard of a town called Sand Springs, and that there was an orphanage there, that a man was taking care of children that were orphans, and in the home, and that he didn't let any child be adopted from the home because he didn't believe in separating siblings. And he says that's all they have is each other, and they're not, he wouldn't let any of them be adopted. People had asked him to let him adopt a child, but he never took just one child. He let someone adopt that child because it was better off to belong to a family. But where there were more than one children, he took them into the home, and he said, you are mine, and no child will have to worry about an adoption, because he had rescued the orphans from Tulsa's children home when there were a lot of accidents that took a father away from a family during a coal mining disaster, and then the oil. And so they had put the citizens, the men of the city, built a home to take care of the children so their mothers could go to work, mothers with children under school age, so they could find a job. They couldn't leave underage children and go work. So they could put them in there, and then there were a lot of orphans besides. And so they had them in a home, and he when they went broke in the 1909 Depression, the home went broke because the people were feeding them by donations from different people, and the donations fell off. And Mr. Breeding heard Mr. Page, he had Mr. Breeding, a Salvation Army captain, to take care of the children. When he rescued the 21 orphans, he went out to see how they were doing, and he was appalled to know that they were giving away little brothers and sisters from the other children, and they were all sad about it, and so he told them, don't give another child away, and get those that you gave away back if you can. Of course they couldn't. People wanted them. But he told the children then, when he took them out to this piece of land that he named Sand Springs, and he put them in tents until he only had one little house built to put other people in, and he had tents up for old folks and old men, and one old man and women, well, and then more than one man, because he had a crippled man and his workers and everything. And so he put up tents and took care of the children, and he took so that there wouldn't be any of them separated from each other, and he
So your mother put you and your siblings there?
well, it was later when yes, and so she managed, she prayed that she could live long enough to get her children to that place, and so she took us. She got well enough with the help of a nephew's wife. Well, first she got married again. She got better. Oh, that was later that she got married. And so she got us there in the home. And then later she got married again, and she had another child. And she thought she could maybe get, he had 3 children. She thought, well, she could get her children then, maybe, but he didn't. The oldest girl was 16, and she didn't want my mother to come in. I don't know if her mother was dead or what, but she resented her coming in to the home, and was mean to her children. And so she just stayed there about a couple of years, and it got to be, and then she got pregnant with another child, and it got to be too much for her, for this girl that didn't want her there, and she's fighting her, slapping her children around, and so she left, and then she came to Sand Springs to live, to be near us, and
what kind of memories do you have from your time at the orphanage?
from a what?
What do you remember from the orphanage?
Oh, well.
Did you have chores?
We had, Mr. Page says it's good for children to have something to do. And so give them little chores to do that they can. And they gave us, during the summer, we had certain jobs that they gave us. One summer I had to keep our playroom swept, and put the dolls and things up on the we had a big chest of drawers, so each child could have a great big drawer of their own, and then we had our toys out on the floor. And so this was when after I was in school. I didn't have anything to do when I was in the nursery. And I was, by the time they had boarded us out because they had no room in the home that they had built for the children, the first home that they built for the children. And it was in 1915. So by then they had a home built for all the children that they had. And I came before they had the big home finished. So I lived in the first home, and then on Christmas they had the big home that was 3 stories and a basement, and it's a big, beautiful home. And they had an upstairs nursery for those who were under school age. And so I went up to the nursery. I was in the nursery for a little while, but by then I was around about 5 years old, I think, by then. And so when I started going to school, well, when they had the nursery, they had one of the houses that they had earlier built for their children before they built the children's home. Well, they used those little houses, one of them for a nursery, and that was when it was in the first home that they used a house for the nursery for the underage school children. And then they built other houses for the older girls, and then for the boys, they had the boys in tents with a wooden floor in the tents, and they had a lot of older women and one man who he was 75 years old, and he came and he worked in the flowers and in the garden. And another man that planted lots of flowers. So Mr. Page made him a flower house, a greenhouse, because he had put so many flowers on the hill and made it look so pretty. But anyway, that was. And when I went to the bigger home, was on Christmas when they had it finished. It was in 1916. And so I guess I would have been about 4 in 1916. And so I can't remember too much about, except that we had at the nursery, it had blacktop, and it had walls all around the roof, and a big eagle was on the emblem thing, was carved or something up at the up deck, and then the wall all around that we kids couldn't climb, and they had play things out there, slides and swings out on the blacktop. But the blacktop in the summer was so hot for our little feet that they put boards across then. made a wooden floor for us. So that was where we were until we went to school. And when we became 6 and went to school, well, we went downstairs and were one of the little girls. And for the simple, to make it more simple, whenever they wanted to call all of the little girls or the bigger girls or the so-and-so, they called us little girls from 6 to 12. And you were middle-sized girls from 12, and they had the playroom. We each had a playroom, the little ones, from 6 to 12. And then from 12, they had another playroom, and it was for the older girls, and they were just alike. And in the big new home, they had a separate bed, separate rooms for all the older girls who were 16 and older. And they had curtains on the front and open at the top, so the heat from the radiators would circle good, throughout the home and make it comfortable. It had a great big marble hall, and if we did anything and got marks, she had a board up here. If you got punished, she'd give you a mark, and then you had to do something to get the mark off of the board, or you couldn't go to the show on Saturday or something, And the way she kept the hall shining was making them mop the big long hall. It seemed like it was a mile long, because they had a sewing room. They had a parlor at the end with pianos and all the and a library. It had books in there, And I spent a lot of time in there. They didn't have any books for children, though. In that day, we didn't have children's books. My first day of school was glorious to me because I was going to get a book. Am I talking too long?
No.
And so, but it was a beautiful home. Oh, it was a gorgeous home. And he believed in children getting lots of fresh air, and he had porches all around the first home that he had built, and on every floor he had porches around it so that you could get the sunshine, and on this place it had the porches all around the west end of it, and the other end of it was our bedrooms. We had one big bedroom that made a circle, a square, around the back, and then on the sides, and then on the inside, and then a large opening into the hallway. And my bed was on the left-hand side because my sister Beulah, who was 3 years older than I was, they wanted her to be next to me to look after me. They expected her to not let me get hurt or anything, but instead they got after her. If I did anything, she got in trouble too. So, but I wasn't too bad a kid. But so I did get into trouble with the other kids. One time like when the peaches were ripe, the peach orchard was right in front of us there when we were in the playgrounds. And that was too much of a temptation, those gorgeous big peaches out there. And so my sister was more of a leader. People are born leaders, and they have followers. And she taught us all, she had a spit band. She called it a spit band because we had combs and paper wrapped around it, and we marched up and down the cement walls, and she could keep a band with it, doing her arms and feet and her tongue all at the same time. I mean, her mouth. Like that, she'd blow through her lips and stomp her foot and wave her arms and lean and walk backwards. And we all marched after her with our combs and our tin cans and everything, and even Mr. Page wanted to hear the band. And and she was a leader, and but she sometimes got them into mischief. And so she said, I want one of those peaches. And I knew that she meant, I want one for me and one for Opal, because she always looked out for Opal. I didn't have to be naughty. She was naughty for me. So because I was small for my age, well, they could hoist me together up on top of a little drinking fountain that is still there on the grounds that was built with stones, and it had a fountain on the inside, a hydrant rather. It had, so that if we were out playing, we could get us a drink of water. And it had a slanted roof, and the roof was facing the home, and we could see from the front door if anybody came out. And so they hoisted me up there, and my head was over so I could see the door. And they said, we had a word that kids always make up things, and we'd say, cheese it, if we saw anybody coming. And so they said, cheese it. And when some of the braver girls were out in the orchard getting their lap full of peaches so that we could all have some. And they, and I yelled, cheese it, because Mrs. McDonald, one of the matrons, was coming out the door with a big pitcher of lemonade. And we didn't dream she was going to do that. She had ice cold lemonade for us. And I scrambled down from the ups on top of there, and the peaches began to fly in the air. They didn't want to be caught with a peach, and that was a funny scene, seeing all of those peaches. And she says, well, girls, she was a good sport. She says, well, girls, I'm going to have to report you. She said, I wouldn't have known that you had a peach in your hand if you hadn't thrown it. So she said, you told on yourself, and I have to report you. So we all had to march up to our girls' matron and take a big dose of castor oil. And she had us to bend over on a chair, and she gave us one good hard slap with a razor strap. That's what she used. She gave us one big strap, and of course the castor oil was worse than the licking, and so we all had to go up on the porch and couldn't play anymore that afternoon. We had to play out on the porch. So they weren't cruel to us or anything like that, but they used the razor strap, and it hurt too. And if we needed it, or they more often punished us with getting the work done around the place, by having us to do the job. But they did assign us jobs for, like, one time I had, school was out, and I had the job of washing down the basement steps from the dining room. They had a bathroom right at the end of the dining room, and the stairs went down, and there was where the cold storage for all the fruit and all the ice. They made their own ice, and I enjoyed that job because I would had to sweep the bathroom and sweep down the stairs to the basement. And Mr. Avey, John Avey, was in charge of the storage, and they had meat, and people came up and bought meat even from them. They had so much meat, and they had a storage. When this was way before refrigeration, you know, and people had small ice boxes, and the stores, I guess the stores had meat too, but I've heard since that I wouldn't have known because I was in the home when it happened. But I had different people say that they went up when they wanted to buy some meat. They went up there, and Mr. Avey would cut them off whatever much they wanted, you know. And he was a very nice man. And this fascinated me was the way they made the eyes. He had these great big square or oblong square sort of tin things that went down into the ground under the floor, and they had doors over them, and he had a big wheel, great big wheel, about that big around, and a chain, and he'd hook it on the sides of the ice thing. He'd take the floor up, you know, and put it on the ice bucket and do this to get the 300 pound, that would be 300 pound, wouldn't it? 300 pound ice block up, and then he'd turn it over, and he'd take it, wheel it on the chain to the room where they kept the big cakes of ice for the storage, for the freezer, you know. And so that fascinated me, and I made my arms very strong by he let me pull that chain. I couldn't pull it at first, but I kept on every day going down there and pulling them up. And I had my arms so strong that one day I laid my arm against the door facing like this, and one of the little kids put his arms around it like this and raised his feet up, and I could hold him there. That's pretty strong, isn't it?
That's pretty strong.
And so I guess that's where I got my strong arms even now, but I'm hurting my back because my strong arms keep lifting things I shouldn't lift.
Well, did you ever think about running away?
I hate to tell this, but
You don't have to.
Well, I have still got a little throat problem. I always had a throat problem, and I got a sore throat easy. And I guess I had weak lungs or something that I'd have to miss school sometimes because of my sore throat, and I had been sick. My throat, I couldn't talk it. My throat would get so sore. And so if I missed any school, math was always hard for me. And so I would have to really make up, you know. So we had a study hall that we went to on twice a week. And it was a library and study hall. It was on the boys' floor because the big boys had a building of their own And the little boys, they kept the little boys up in the elementary classes. But our matron was the matrons were all old maids except Mrs. McDonald, and the music maid, piano teachers had been married, and the school teacher had been married, but the other matrons had never been married. And Mrs. Lindsay was so strict. She was the head matron. She was the first one that came, and so that made her the head matron. And she was so strict that if the boys were there to eat, they ate there at the home, but they lived a piece away from the home in a rock house. And the girls, if they stopped on the stairway to talk to each other, she'd say, outside, outside, to the boy, wouldn't let them even talk to the girls. And so they made jokes about it. And because she was so afraid that they would get into mischief, I guess. And so we went to study hall to study one time, and my one of the girls that was in the same room in school with me was right across the hall, the table from me, and we kids make signs, that we can talk a lot with signs, and so the matron, first thing, they had a substitute. We had a good matron that helped us if we needed help with our work. She would help us. But this one, she was on vacation, and this one, her name was Hanson. And I heard her to my back, The boys, they had their tables over here, and then we had a table here for ours. And she was over there where the boys were, and she cracked somebody over the head with a ruler. And she said, "We will have no talking in here." And so we all looked at each other, like the old bat or something, And so then I was working on a problem, and I shoved it across the table to Alma. And I said, "Is that the way you do it? I don't know what it was. Is this right?" And she came over and to my back, and she wham, like that with that ruler. And she had that, they have a sharp edge on them, and it really hurt, and it made me so mad. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, But it hurt, and I was full of anger. And so I wrote a note to vent my anger. And as I've already told you, the girls used to ask me to see if I could make a rhyme with this or that, because that was my funny thing that I did, And so I thought, I just hate that old woman. So I said, "Old lady, am I taking too long? Hold up your hand if I'm taking too long."
You're fine.
I said, "Old lady, handsome." She was big as a man. I mean big all over. I don't mean fat. I mean she was as big as a man. Oh, she was a big thing. I said, "Old lady, handsome. She's as big as an ox. She thinks she's about as smart as a fox." And then I tried to think of an angry word to end it with. I said, and I couldn't think of an angry word, but one of the girls just a few days earlier had been reprimanded by Miss Lindsay. That was the last resort. No, Mr. Breeding was the last resort. We had a girls' matron, and she punished us or whatever. And if she got mad enough, she'd send you down to Miss Lindsay, and Miss Lindsay would really give it to you. And so she was coming up from being sent down to Miss Lindsay, and she said, "I hate that old." I forgot what
Huzzy.
what was it I called her?
Huzzy.
Huzzy. I hate that old Huzzy. And so I thought, that's a good angry word. And I wrote it down there, the old Huzzy. And so I folded it up, the paper real small, and put it in my shoe and kicked Alma across, one of the girls across the hall from me, across the table from me. And she reached down and got it, and she read it, and she grinned and just wadded it up and threw it to the center of the table where we're supposed to throw our trash, you know. So after the study hall, the boy, Leo Simons, was the one that was, it's his job to take a big waste basket and brush all of the waste paper off of the tables. And so he went, the paper had sort of come open, and he saw my name, and he told me this later, how this all came about. He was apologizing. It really made him feel bad. And so he opened it, and he was reading it, and she just reached over his head and took it out of his hand and read it, and went in and gave it to Miss Lindsay. Well, the next morning I was eating breakfast, and one of the girls said, "Opal, Miss Lindsay wants you to come up to her room when you get through eating breakfast." So I was happy. I thought I was going to get a new pair of shoes, because if she saw any of us with a flopping shoe, you know how kids get their shoes, or your shoes look bad, she'd take you into the shoe room and give you a new pair of shoes. And so I thought, I'm going to get a new pair of shoes, because that's the only time she'd ever called me into her room, into her, not her own room, but to downstairs where her business was. And so I went up there, and she picked up the paper and said, "Did you write this?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." Looked down at my feet. "Yes, ma'am." And she said, you know what that word means?" And I said, "No, ma'am." And she said, "That means that is a filthy woman." A filthy woman who sells herself. And I thought, how could a woman sell herself? I couldn't, I didn't know anything, you know. We were innocent as we could be about everything. And so she said, "You are a filthy mouthed little girl." And she said, and I began to cry, because I thought I was doomed. Here I was called a filthy mouthed little girl, and I was going to be, I figured I had the name, and everybody's going to start calling me filthy mouthed little girl. And I was only 14 years old, but that's a very impressionable age. And I had already gotten a complex, because my older sister said my ears were too big. And I thought if anybody looked at me twice, they thought, how could anybody have such big ears? And so I'd already gotten a complex. And so I began to cry, and I said, "Daddy Page, he had 2 weeks earlier told me that if I got too lonesome for my two sisters, they had both gone out from the home, and said if I was too lonesome for them, I could go home to my mother, that she was well now and everything." And I just hadn't given it a thought. I was happy. I'd been there since I was 3, and here I was 14. It was home. I had friends. They were my sisters, my brothers, and I was happy. And I got to see Mother when I wanted to. I mean, no, I didn't either. I didn't see her very often at all, but I was happy where I was, and I just hadn't given it a thought. So, but when she said that, I said, Daddy Pate said I could go and live with my mama if I wanted to. And I don't like it here anymore, because I was afraid everybody's going to call me filthy mouthed little girl. And I was just crushed. So, when I said, I don't like it here anymore, she said, she thought she was a good woman. I don't want to, she was just too strict, and she just didn't think, she didn't know that it crushed you like that. And anyway, but I just went all to pieces. And she said, I'll give you a good spanking before you can tell your mother about that. And she had me to lean over the chair, and she took the razor strap, and she gave me a good spanking with the razor strap. And then she said, now go on to school. And so I ran out the door. Ran downstairs and ran out the door, and I just started running, and I was crying. And it was in October, and it was a cold October day, but I didn't know that I went off without my coat or anything. I just kept running. I couldn't tell you where I went. It's absolutely, I don't know. I didn't know how I got where I was when I finally realized that I was cold. And I stopped, and Mr. Page had built one end of the town for the colored folks, the black people, because they were nice people, and he had some of them working at, and so he just let one of them be a realtor and bring their people there. And of course, it was when it was James Crow law, and some of the white people complained about it, and so he says, well, they're people too, and they're nice people, and you can give them jobs. They will help you with your ironing, or I think that air thing just went out. And so, anyway, he, and that's where I was. I was down there where the town was, where they had their houses, where the black people lived. And I never had been down there, and I didn't know how I got down there, and I was cold, and I stopped, and I thought, what am I going to do? I don't know whether to go to school. I can't go home and get my coat. I don't know what to do. Will I even get to stay in the home anymore? And just about that time, the mail carrier that took the mail across the river to the folks on the other side stopped and asked me if I wanted to ride. And this was in 1926, when people were still safe riding on the fender of a car. But of course he invited me in. He said and I didn't want to get in with him, but I wasn't afraid. I just, I didn't know what to do. And I said, do you know? Cap Haney. I knew that my mother had married a man named Cap Haney because they had come to see me when they had the children, the new babies and things. And so he said, I have newspaper for him. I'll be stopping at their door. And he said, don't be afraid of me. I'm the mail carrier, and I bring folks back and forth from here all the time. And because I had a lot of people that hitched across the river, and it was common. And so I got in the car, and when he let me out in front of the house, I ran to Mama, and she looked like this through the screen, and she saw me coming, and she came out, and I jumped up on the porch, and I said, Mama, do you love me? And she said, well, of course I love you. And I said, Miss Lindsay said you gave us away. And she said, oh. And I was so sick I couldn't take care of 5 children. And he offered to take care of them for me, and I couldn't take care of myself, and so forth. And then she said, I saw that you were taken so good care of, and you were learning. She said, I went to get you when I got married. I thought I could bring you, take care of you then when I got married, but Mr. Page asked me to leave him there because Beulah was a very talented piano player, and that he said all of your girls have good voices, and we're giving the oldest daughter opera singing, and he said I can do so much for them, and what can you do? If you took them, you couldn't bring them back, because I've had to make rules, because one woman, when I first started this, kept bringing her children back and taking them, bringing them back and taking them. And he said a child has to have a place of permanence. They have to be known, they have to know that they are known, that they are loved, and that they have someone. And you can't jerk the children around from one. This woman would say, this is your new daddy, and she'd take him out and come back. And then she'd come back with another man was her new daddy. And so he legally adopted us all. Not in the sense that you're going to inherit his money, but in the sense that it's like a cooperation. You belong to him. And he said, I want them to have a sense of permanence, of belonging, of knowing that they're loved and everything. And said, a lot of times a stepchild is not always welcome by the stepfather. And he said, why don't you wait a while and see how your marriage turns out, or, till you'll be very sure, because you can't bring them back. And so my mother considered it all, and she thought greater love is for your children, and they're better off with where they are. And so she left us in there. And so when my stepfather came home, I thought it was going to be wonderful. I'm going to have a daddy. And I'm going to have a daddy and a mama. But it didn't turn out that way. He didn't. He was real nice to me at first. But he had it in his mind that a kid that was raised in an orphanage has learned how to do everything. He didn't know this orphanage was not the kind of an orphanage where you make little workers out of you. We had all the cultural advantages, but we didn't know how to cook. We didn't know how to, we had everything done for us. And I didn't know that he was expecting me to do a lot of work and everything. And I don't know why he didn't like me. I just loved him. But he soon found out that I liked to read, and I would get a book in my studies. I would study at night, and my sister never brought a book home, but she would grab a broom once in a while. I mean, I had Lois, my mother, for the second marriage that she had made. She had another baby, and her name was Lois. And Lois was about 4 years younger than me, but she was a real clean. She wanted to clean house all the time. She would get the broom and sweep the sand out because we didn't have carpets. They had linoleum, on the farm there. And she would sweep the sand out, and she'd fuss about it and go around and straighten things up. And I sat with a book, and that's the only thing I could think of, because I thought I've got to get my lessons. And so when I came home from school, I would help with washing the dishes. Lois and I would wash and dry the dishes, And I think she only started doing that after I came, because I think Cap expected me to do the dishes and scrub the floors and take care of the children, because the first time that he took me to see all of his kinfolks, and everything like that. And I called him Daddy for a time or two, but I couldn't. It stuck it, because Mama was calling him Cap all the time. He was called Cap because he had been captain of the Anti-Horse Thief Association, and he had a picture of himself that they had given him in a horseshoe, and down here they got a rock cemented into the bottom like this for all of the horse thieves, you call. And so he got stuck with the name Cap, but his name was Oscar David. My husband's father's name was David Oscar, and I get mixed up which one of them. The other one was Oscar Davis. But he soon got to resenting me, and I didn't know why. I had no, I had been raised to grab a broom and start sweeping and all of that, like Lois did. And I just thought I've got to get my education, and I wanted to study my lessons. But he did. He would hit me, and he like to broke my nose one time because I just loved him, and I wanted to read to him because he liked for Mama to read. And he would come home from work and lay down in the floor where it was cool on the linoleum, and his two babies, as he called it, one was about 3, and the other one was about 5, and they weren't in school. And the one that was 5, they had picked at her, and he had let his brothers tell her tell your dad to go to HELL and things like that. and she would tell it. She'd say it to her daddy, and he'd laugh. Instead of when they wanted to do my child that way, I said she'll get spanked right in front of you if she does, if she says that to me. And so I wouldn't let anyone tell her things just so they could get a laugh and mess her up. So they had messed her up. She was just a little mean thing, and she would admit it. And I mean later, because she regretted that she was that way. And so she was throwing rocks at me, and he had, anytime there was any work to do, he says, my babies don't have to do anything as long as we get those, and he called us such vile names that I don't want to repeat them, but he'd think of awful, nasty, awful names to call us.
So you went back to the home then?
No,
No.
I never did go back.
Where did you go to high school?
They had a little, to high school I walked from, are you familiar with anything in Sand Springs?
Not very much, no. I know where Arby's is.
You know what?
Where Arby's is, and that's about it. No.
Hardee's?
Uh-huh.
Well, let me think. Do you know where the Salvation Army has a nursery, sort of, that they keep? Do you know where that is?
I do.
Well, that was the school that I went to finish. I was in the 6th grade when I left the home, and I finished to go to the 9th at Sand Springs. I walked from the Salvation Army place down. What is that road that goes east and west called? Well,
That's 412 now.
You don't know where the Walmart used to be at Sand Springs?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Where the Walmart used to, I walked from way up there where the, do you know where the Green Tree assisted living is?
A little bit, yes.
Well, that land once was my stepfather's land. He had 40 acres, and our house was his house, and he was just down to the corner going north. I guess it'd be north, going down to the main road that went across there. So I walked from there and across the bridge and up to the high school. I don't know how far is that, honey?
Probably 2 miles.
I walked to school in the cold winter. It was 29. It's the coldest we've ever had since, they said. And this was in 29. And I walked to high school. And I got it snowed, a deep snow that went way up under my dress. We wore dresses, never wore trousers like we do now. And my stockings, because my mother bought me in a catalog enough material to make me a dress one time. And that's all that he didn't ever buy me anything, or she was afraid to, because he resented her children, me taken away from his children, And, but anyway, my legs never froze because I had the same stockings that I came from on the home 2 years earlier, and I had double the toes when the heels went out, and we learned to darn our own socks when we got a heel rubbed into them, you know. And but I didn't have any darning cotton, and I didn't dare ask for anything. And so I just doubled my hose under, and till that my socks were right here. I had some inner tube garters. We used to, out of a bicycle, I guess it was bicycle, Mama made me some garters to hold them up there. Well, when I stepped out for a car to go by, it was clear up to here because I'm short, got short legs, you know, and I was so cold one day that it was in '29. It was the coldest we ever had. That I was wet. My shoes were soaking wet, and my socks. By the time I got to the school, I was nearly frozen. And I stopped. The steel mill had just opened, and I stopped there, and I wanted to get warm, and I just couldn't go on, but I had to go on because my socks were wet and my shoes were wet, but I had to go on to school. I couldn't stay there, so I tried to I took my socks off and tried to hold them up in front of there to dry them, but that was just warmed them. I had to put them back on and went on to school. Well, by the time I walked back home, Cap had a car, but he always went to work early in the morning. He worked for an oil company, Burton and somebody, and he was a the man that kept the water flowing or something for the oil wells. I don't understand it, but it was something. He was a water man for the oil company, some oil company. And so, anyway, he wouldn't have taken me to school. And there was no bus to take you to school. There was a bus that would take the children that were in the elementary, you know, before they go to the 9th grade. Well, they took them there in the country, but there was no bus that took we kids that walked to school to go to high school. So most of them just quit in the 8th grade. But I went on and I walked all that way. But by the time I had walked back home, I was so sick. Oh, I was so sick. I had pneumonia. And so my mother told me to go to bed, and she got camphor and put on my chest and everything, trying to doctor me. When Cap came home, well, she had supper ready, and I didn't come to the table. I didn't want to eat. I was too sick, and my mother brought me something to the bed for me to eat, and he said, "Let her come to the table. If she can't come to the table, let her die, God damn her." And so my mother then had to start sneaking me something to eat before he came home at 5 o'clock. But she nursed me back to health and everything. When I ran away from the home, though, I forgot to tell you this part. Mr. Page, they missed me that night, and they told Mr. Page that I had run away from home, and he sent his detective out he knew where I'd go. I don't know how he knew everything, but he knew everything, it seemed like. And he sent them out there, and his name was Max, that came to get me. And I said, "I don't want to go. I don't want to go." And he said, "Well, honey, you have to go. You have to go. Daddy Page has sent for you." And I said, "Let me go see him." And I was going to tell him my heart was broken, you know, and everything. And but so he called him and said she doesn't want to go back. And he said, well, let her spend the night with her mother and then go get her tomorrow evening. And so said, you can go and get her again, go again tomorrow evening. And so he said, okay. So the next day he came and got me. But that day I went up to the school the day that he let me, before the school was out. And I was feeling good because I was going to have a mama and a papa. And so I went up to the school, and I liked it there, and I was a new girl, and they were all of them crowding around me and everything, and my sister Lois was in school already, and she was proud of me, you know, and I was proud of her and everything. And so I thought, well, I like this. I'll have a father and a mother. I think I'll stay here. And so he said, if she doesn't want to come back, well, she won't have to. And so I went to see him the next day, that next evening, and he put his arm around me and he said, I'm sorry that you're not happy. And I started crying, and I couldn't talk. I couldn't tell him anything. All I did was just keep, you know how you are. I don't cry pretty. Some people can cry pretty, but I don't. And so I just kept crying until he said, well, honey, you go and spend a few weeks with your mother, and if you want to come back, then you can come back. And so they took me on back to my mother's, and it wasn't 3 weeks till I sensed that I wasn't going to be wanted by Cap. And I got lonesome for the girls, but I didn't go back. I loved being with my mother. She was such a sweet, wonderful woman. And she was one of these kind of women that she never quarrels, and she never would say anything back when Cap would say awful things to her. She was just a very sweet, and everybody loved her. All of even the girls' husbands, they all just loved her. Everybody loved her. She was so sweet, and I liked being with her. But it came to the time that, well, I got well, and I went on and went to school, but I didn't have any money to buy the books. And the teacher loaned me the books, but I knew they were getting tired of me borrowing their book, because I couldn't get any books to study. And I had too much pride to go back to the home and ask them. They would have given me the books. It would have helped me any way they could, but I had too much pride to go back. So I didn't ask them. So it became so difficult for me to go to school there that I saw Mr. Breeding one day, and I said, I would like to, I didn't tell him I couldn't buy my books. I just said, does the home own the business? They had a business study, you know, what do you call it? Anyway, and I said, does the home own that? And he said, yes, it does. And he said, I said, I can't afford to go to school, high school. And can I go to the business school so I can get me a good job? And so he said, well, yes, and I wouldn't have to pay. And so he bought me my books, but I didn't think to tell him I needed paper. And so I didn't want to go back. And I never did run into him anymore. But let's see, I forgot something about that. That was later that all happened. Let's see. Oh, when I was sick, I finally, Mama got me well, and I was able to get up and come to the table and eat. And I said, when Cap gets the groceries, he would go get the groceries. He got one, and she stayed home with the kids. And so when he got the groceries, they often had dried fruit, that he would buy dried fruit. He never brought fresh fruit or anything, but he'd buy dried fruit, and Mom would make fruit pies, and everything. And so I said, Mama, I'm hungry for some apricots. Would you have him to get some? Don't let him know that I asked you to get some apricots. And she put it on the list. So he got the apricots, and that night all I wanted was apricots. I didn't want anything to eat. I didn't have any taste, but I was hungry for something kind of sour and sweet, And so I didn't, when I got to the dining room was my bed. The extra bed was in the dining room, and then there was the table, big round table, and then a stove that was an oil burner over here. And so it was against the wall, and the table. My stepfather sat on that side of the stove to eat, and his two little ones sat on that side of the stove to eat, where it was warm. And then Lois and I sat on the back side, and my sister Beulah, when she did come home, but she had been run off and she didn't come off. Anyway, and we sat on lard cans because they didn't have enough chairs to go around the table, but they bought their lard in those big lard cans. Farmers used to do that. And so they made nice chairs. So we sat on the other side on the lard cans, and my mother then sat between Cap and us. But Mama's moved Virginia. She was a little rascal, moved Virginia over a little bit and let me sit next to the fire because I had just gotten out of bed from the sick. And that didn't sit well with Virginia because she wouldn't sit on the can. She stood up next to me, and she was mad. And so she started picking apricots out of my plate and eating them, and I said, Mama, Virginia's putting her, I was 16 by then, and you know how picayune you are at 16. I said, she's putting her dirty fingers in my plate and grabbing the apricots out of it. And she said, Virginia, you stop that. And so Virginia spit in my plate. I said, oh, Mama, she spit in my plate. And Cap jumped up and he started to hit me across the stove, from the stove. And my mother jumped up and she said, oh, will you and Lois get your coats on? I've suffered over my children enough. I just can't take it anymore. And she said, don't you touch her. And to him. And we got our coats on, and here it was. I'd just gotten out of bed with pneumonia. And she took pneumonia every year because he never fixed a thing on the place. There's cracks on the windows, and she'd stuff a pillow in the window. And it had an upstairs. They never did finish building the house, on the inside. And it had an upstairs. It had just, you could almost see through it. And just a paneling so far up. And we could hear the rats running at night upstairs, you see. And anyway, my mother had tacked a quilt up there. And my mother she was someone, she could draw anything. I got my talent from her, She could draw anything. And she could make quilts. She took his old work pants and made quilts so heavy you could hardly stand them. They were so heavy out of the best part of his old pants and things. And she nailed a quilt up there to keep some of the wind out. So anyhow, she said, "Get your coats. We're going to Gertrude's." That was my oldest sister that lived in Sand Springs. And she had, the Depression was on, and she had was living in a 2-room house because her husband was a violinist and he didn't have but one customer, but they were living in his mother's house. And they had 2 babies, 2 little boys, and she couldn't take care of us, but we went to her house. We started out to her house. We got about a half a mile from our house when one of the neighbors came by and saw us, and we stepped out of the ruts to let him go by, and he stopped and asked us where we were going, and we said she told him she's going to Sand Springs to her daughter's house. And so he gave us a ride. Otherwise, we would have all probably died with pneumonia because that was such a bitter, bitter cold winter. And she took pneumonia easy, and I had just gotten over. So I feel thankful. I think the Lord intervened, and and so she took me to my sister's house then, and she spent the night, and then she got to worrying about her 2 babies that she had left at home, and he had to go to work, and she was worried about the 2 little ones, and so she called him the next day to come and get her, and she went back home. But after that, there was one time when I was married, and everything was all right, and I got work through the school. I don't know why I was so driven to keep going to school, but I was just driven. It was different things. I was used to being around a lot of people, and I liked people. I was lonesome without them. And besides, something drove me to want to get an education. And so I would, the teachers would find you. People call the school sometimes, and they find out if there's any kids that want to work it. And I worked for nothing, for a roof over my head, and my keep, my board, used to room and board, and went to school. And one of them gave me 50 cents a week, and that kept me enough so that I could pay my bus fare and pay. I think we could ride for 10 cents on the bus to school, and I took care of her 2 children, and another one um, I put them to bed and I gave them their bath and I did all those things, you know, and helped her in the kitchen. I didn't do any cooking. They always did the cooking. And I just washed the dishes. And so but I would become unhappy, or if I got sick, I'd go back out to the farm, and Cap he didn't run me off. I'd go back out there and I'd stay maybe until I got well, and then I'd go and find another job at another place, and I'd go to school. So, but I missed a lot, but fell in the cracks, you see. I used too many commas because during the time they were telling, I never did understand why you don't put a comma after. You know, when I was growing up, we put a comma after every time there's a pause in the sentence. And I wanted to do that, and that was one thing I couldn't. I evidently got into the business of writing, and I got to make too many commas. So anyway, I did get through the 9th grade, and then I believe I was in the 11th grade when I got married. I got married instead of going on. And but then I went back when my daughter was in school taking typing, because I started getting a yen to write poetry. And I had every kind of, in the 30s, I had every kind of ailment it seemed like there was to have. I had bursitis. I got bursitis so bad that it just hurt, and I had hay fever. I was allergic to everything. I had to take a test with all those needles in your back, you know, and it looked like everything made me sneeze and cough and blisters on my nose, and but at the same time, I was teaching a Sunday school class of children. I love children, and I was teaching a youth class in the evening, and my husband wouldn't let me work. He had been married once before, and his wife told him after they got the divorce how many times she had been going with an insurance man and this and that, and so he wouldn't let me work. He didn't trust it anymore. He didn't trust women anymore. And if I even took a course, when I read in the paper that somebody was going to give a course in art or something, I would sign up for it. And he would come down there sometime to be sure I was there. And he finally found out that I was happy. I just wanted to learn. I just wanted to learn all I could, and I had a yearning to write books, and so about in '61 I took 25 years to finish that book, because I was not satisfied that it was the best I could do, and I'm a perfectionist in trying to get them right.
What was the title of your book?
What?
What was the title of your book?
A Fool's Enterprise, or The Life of Charles Page. That was it. It was The Fool's Enterprise. One of those articles will give you my Paul show him that article of what I found I could do because I tried?
Oh, yeah.
It's a short
That
article.
one
Can
right
I
there.
give you a time to
That-
hear it?
that is-
What I found out because I tried, I was trying to be a writer, and there was a woman that had a class, and she said, you all have to write an article. And I said, I can't write articles. I'd never written one. And I said, in here, and so this is what I wrote. I can't write an article. I couldn't, but I tried. And I told them different things that I had done because I tried. I thought I couldn't do. I thought I couldn't write this book. I had this complex that I didn't think I was worth much, and so I didn't think I could do very much worthwhile anything, you know. And but I tried, and so I wrote the article. And I wish he had been reading it out loud, but of course this is.
That's okay. I'd rather you recite one of your poems that you wrote.
You wrote what?
I would rather you tell us one of your poems that you wrote. Do you have one of those memorized?
All of them memorized.
Well,
A favorite one?
well, one of them that I've won a lot of awards on. I haven't sent the others out, but when I went to college I still wanted to write when I got married. And when my husband passed away, I said I'm going to go to college because I belong to a writers club, and I just loved being with other writers, and I joined their club. And one of the writers' name was Susan Jarvis, and she's married now as Susan King. And we would give to the crowd of writers, we'd take turns about reading what we had written for critique purposes. And so she said, you people who spend your money taking these 2 weeks courses, you only get at the very most is two classes in the week, or 2 weeks. They never are more than that, and you pay as much as you could pay to go get a term in college. And said, and you get 16 weeks. How about that? And so I said, well, how about that? And I enrolled, and so I just thoroughly enjoyed it because I was there with a bunch of writers, and they were great writers. Great, you know, there are some awful great writers in this world, and everything. And I made straight A's, only they called it by a 4. Is that a highest grade in college? How do they grade it?
4.0.
4?
Yes.
4.0. Uh-huh.
Well, whatever it was, one day they sent a reporter to the school because they started letting the senior citizens go free. And you didn't get any credits, but I didn't care about credits. I just wanted to learn. And so, anyway, the man that was over this said some people, there was 1 or 2 people that had come to class just because they wanted to hear everybody's stories. They got a kick. It was a hobby for them to go hear us working on our stories. But they didn't want to write, and so they said and they got to go free because they were older. And so he said, we've got to get rid of them. They've got to make a grade to show that they're really writing. So we had to look at our grades, and so the teacher showed me mine, and it was a 4. And I said, I just made 4 points. And she said, honey, 4 is the same as an A. And I said, she said, we grade you different now. And I got, he ran across a certificate that I got for being on the president's, what is it now? I had
Honor
some,
list.
I had some certificates that I had won on poetry and stuff, and one of them said I was on the president's
Honor
Oh,
roll
oh,
or something.
honor roll.
for having straight A's. I mean straight whatever.
But
I don't know, and I don't care about what it was, but
do you have a favorite poem that you know by heart?
oh, I know a lot of them. But you maybe you like a little short one. Let's see. I took my paints and brush in hand to paint a scene of sea and sand. Mesmerized by the rumbling sound, I laid my paints and brushes down. My easel served as shade that day as my thoughts wandered far away. The sea, the sea. They threw shells. Paul, is that poem on top of there?
Yeah.
I think he was just reading that.
Well, I'll let you.
Give it to me. Let's see. The sea, the restless sea. Your waves come in and cover me. You toss grain. Let's see. I forget it. I can't read. I can't see, but I know it anyway. You toss strange shells upon the shore to make me fantasize some more. You toss shells from distant lands. You toss upon the sand. Now I can't even
Perhaps from the distant land.
read.
Perhaps from some far distant land.
What?
Meanwhile, another artist's hand.
Oh well, I'm not down there.
You're
far
not
now.
there yet. I
Yeah.
dreamed up bits of poetry. The sea,
Well, I
oh,
know
rest
the
of
rest.
sea.
Okay. I dreamed up. I thought there was more in there. I dreamed up bits of poetry. The sea, the restless sea. The waves come in and cover me. You throw strange shells upon the shore to make me fantasize some more. I did not know an artist's hand had sketched me sprawled upon the sand with easel shading me and captioned it Seductive Sea.
That's very good.
So Opal, what's your secret to longevity? Do you have a secret, or what have you done to? Do you think?
I never did even think of dying, so I don't know. I don't know. I just went on doing everything. I wasn't worrying about dying. I was ready to go if I had to go, and I wanted to get everything. I'm still restless because I can't finish the books I've got started, and I can turn the fonts up till I could read what they put out there. You see, and I know the keyboard, but I can't see the little the top. I wish they would make a strip of magnet of some kind to magnetize the top so that people could see that too, or make it enlarged, because you've got to use those things to put your commas and your erase things, and to put if you want to put a square around your work, or all of those things, and to change the fonts and so forth, and so that makes it so difficult. I would have to get a little magnifying glass I'm short, you know.
Now, do you have a motto you live by?
I have a motto.
Do you have a motto you live by,
I have
Or-
a motto.
or
I
philosophy?
put a motto. The motto I grew up was think right. Mr. Page adopted that as his motto when he was a boy. His mother was always telling him, keep your thinking right. And when he left, when he was a little boy and his father died and left her with 8 children to support, he was cutting wood for other people and for himself and for the stove. Now, I stood at his knee and he told me this. He said, Opal, when I was a boy, I cut wood for the family and because I was the biggest boy in the family. He wasn't the oldest, but he was the largest. He was big like his father's people. He was a big man. He stood 6'3", and he wasn't fat. He was just big. And he said I was the biggest of the boys, and I wanted myself to make the living for the family. I told Ma that I was going to drive the freight wagon that his dad had driven and take the goods from the boats to the Stevens Point stores because they needed the money. But it was sad that the railroad, Northern Pacific, was being built to run through Stevens Point, and it took his job away from him because they started coming by train. But anyhow, he told her, it's not right for people. He was only 10 and a half when his father died at 11, when he was 11, and I guess that was when he was sad to her. He saw her washing other people's clothes and her tears were falling into the tub. She missed her husband, of course, and she was sad that things had turned out like they had, and didn't know what to do. So he tried to help her every way he could. All his children, you see, I lived in Sand Springs, and he had his relatives, gave them all jobs or something if they'd come there, so I got to talk to them. And so they told me a lot of things, and his wife was living, and his daughter was living. And so I had, and then Mr. Breeding, who was with him from the beginning of the project that they called a Fool's Enterprise. And he was there to tell me, and he had a memory like a meat filing cabinet. He could just pull it out there, and so I had all the help I could ever have asked for.
Now, you wrote a book on the history of a man, but I want to know, when history is written about you, what do you want it to say? When history is written about you, what do you want it to say?
Oh, you asked me a question. What was my motto? Well, I guess I answered that. It was think right. But I want to tell you, when I put that in the book, that was his motto, the town adopted it, and they gave the school kids a bracelet saying think right. And he taught us, if you keep your thinking right, you're going to do all right.
And when someone comes back years from now and says, I want to know about Opal Bennefield Clark Moss, what do you want history to say about you?
That I was an author, that I was a writer, and that I wrote good stuff. I didn't write any old filthy stuff. I couldn't stand it when people would use that awful filthy language and think that's what sells. that's what spoils your, and I would tell them, and that's what spoils your, when I said, I cannot believe a person is as nice looking, as educated, as wonderful as you are. I can't fathom you wanting to dirty up your image by writing that filthy stuff. I don't understand that. I said, who gets any benefit from it? They said, well, that's what sells, and I want a book in print. I said, is it worth your name, your own image? And so I don't know. I just believe. I just believe you ought to pass something along that does somebody some good, not something that's going to sell a book. And I just I've had a brother-in-law who wanted my daughter to say things to me because they knew I was such an old maid. They called me when I was married because I had so many principles that I preached to and they said and so this brother-in-law would tell my little daughter like they did my sister-in-law, and see, she regretted that all her life because she was the one that ran me off from my mother the second time. It's because my mother couldn't keep me whenever she spit in the plate, and he like broke my nose, Go ahead.
I think we're done for the day, don't you?
Okay.
I did it all.
I thank you very much for sharing your story.